Steinmauer rises like a slab of winter carved into the Alps, a fortress whose corridors smell of metal and disinfectant and the stories that governments refuse to archive. Into this cold geometry walks Jack Brennan, no longer the rumor in a briefing file but a man who carries consequence the way other men carry scars. The guards move around him with the resigned choreography of people who have learned that true authority doesn't wear a uniform. He signs what he must, surrenders nothing he cares about, and follows the echo of his footsteps to a visitation room that has broken more secrets than truth serum ever did. On the other side of the glass sits Valentin Cassadine, posture loose, gaze alert, the studied poise of a chess master who refuses to admit the board is tilted. Outside, a glacier holds its breath. Inside, two men who do not believe in coincidence circle a single word that neither will say aloud: resurrection. Brennan opens with pressure, not volume. He threads a needle through old WSB memos and vanished lab budgets and the rumor that cryosynthesis is not a defunct Cold War fantasy but a living, humming network with new wiring in Port Charles. The name everyone pretends to have buried, Caesar Faison, hangs between them like frost. Officially, the brain in the jar ended the conversation years ago. Unofficially, it began 100 darker ones. Brennan never states it outright, but the implications are a drumbeat. A preserved mind is a blueprint invites a builder. Port Charles has always attracted architects of the impossible. Valentin watches, amused and irritated in equal measure, because every Cassadine understands leverage and every Cassadine remembers the cost of misreading a zealot. Valentin's response is not a refusal. It is a maze. He speaks in the clean syllables of a man who knows his words will be transcribed, weighed, perhaps weaponized. Yes, there were experiments, yes, certain scientists considered death a negotiable clause. Yes, the Cassadines once bankrolled sins with silver monograms and international shipping manifests. But what Brennan chases now, Valentin suggests, is not a Cassadine heirloom. It is an orphaned idea adopted by opportunists who learned from the most ruthless teachers, Faison among them, that plausible deniability is the only serum that works on every poison. He reminds Brennan, with the lazy cruelty of a man who cannot resist a perfect provocation, that Carly Spencer's name still circulates through dossiers Brennan pretends not to update. A single syllable, Carly, and Brennan's jaw hardens. Valentin notes the reaction and pockets it like cash. Port Charles, meanwhile, does what Port Charles always does, it hums with danger disguised as routine. Dante Falconeri stands in the narrow gap between rumor and chargeable offense, listening to the city's vibrations the way a paramedic listens to a failing heart. He knows the brain in a jar relic was meant to tranquilize the past, not to certify it. He also knows that science thrives on loopholes and villains on the arrogance to exploit them. If someone has refitted the old cold fusion chatter into a colder, cleaner cryosynthesis pipeline, mind preservation, suspended degradation, neural patchwork, then the crime is not just technical, it is theological. What is a life if death is administratively delayed? What is justice if the dead can subcontract their vengeance? Anna Devane answers those questions not from a lectern but from the brittle quiet of a woman who has catalogued Faison's methods in her bones. She has seen the theater of his cruelty, the way he made affection synonymous with compliance and curiosity a weapon. If any echo of him still contaminates the world, alive, archived, or imitated, Anna knows the choreography it will try to dance. She does not trust Brennan's motives, because power often dresses as patriotism when it is only hunger. She does not trust Valentin's omissions, because Cassadines traffic in silence the way merchants traffic in spice. She trusts patterns, and the pattern says that whenever men like Brennan and Valentin begin measuring each other's pulse, someone else is already moving pieces they have not yet named. Back at Steinmauer, Brennan shifts tactics from interrogation to intrusion. He invokes Charlotte Cassadine, not as a threat but as a pressure point, proof that he understands the human tax of secrets. There is a flare in Valentin's eyes at his daughter's name, quickly extinguished. A Cassadine never grants an opponent the dignity of visible panic. Brennan doesn't need panic. He needs acknowledgement that the rumors are not rumors, a shipment routed through shell clinics, a neurologist who vanished after a conference in Zurich, a data breach that stole only one category of files, cryopreservation protocols. Valentin concedes nothing and yet affirms everything by warning Brennan against the simplest mistake, imagining Faison's work as a solo. If it lives as consortium, hydra, contagion. Cut one head and the body smiles. Brennan hears the warning and translates it as a map. Who commands a project designed to survive its creators? Power in this world rarely announces itself. It leaves fingerprints on budgets and ash on the edges of medical journals. It recruits men who crave resurrection because they fear irrelevance. Brennan imagines a network built on redundancy, one lab warm, one lab cold, one scientist public, one scientist erased, one funder philanthropic, one funder criminal. He suspects Port Charles functions as field test rather than headquarters, because Port Charles is the perfect crucible, connected enough to lure talent, chaotic enough to hide results, sentimental enough to underestimate monstrosity. He wants Valentin's confirmation. Valentin denies him the ceremony. But the angle of his smile tells Brennan he has correctly identified the stage, if not the playwright. The conversation veers again when Valentin, almost carelessly, turns the magnifying glass. He mentions what Brennan eats for breakfast, the route he takes to work, the books on his coffee table that no one is supposed to know. It is an impolite reminder, surveillance is a two-way mirror. The WSB chief is not the only man in the room with a network. Brennan hates the exposure and respects the warning. Valentin excels at this, evoking intimacy to advertise distance. The message is crystalline: if Brennan wants answers, he must provide the one currency Cassadines accept: precision. Ask the correct question, and the door opens exactly as far as you deserve. Ask the wrong one, and you prove you are not worth the burden of the truth. Parallel to the men drawing circles around each other, Anna triangulates quietly. She revisits Faison's operating logic: recruit prodigies with grievance, incentivize them with the illusion of legacy, insulate them with masks and numbered accounts. She considers which Port Charles names would tempt such an engine: doctors who dream in algorithms, administrators who think ethics is a budget line, criminals who believe immortality is just good business. She suspects the new stewards are not romantics, they're pragmatists. Cryosynthesis to them is not a resurrection myth, it is an intellectual property defense strategy. Freeze the mind to avoid the leak. Extend the life of a secret by extending the life of the one who holds it. She knows Brennan might weaponize that insight for his own ascendancy. She knows Valentin might auction it to the highest bidder to protect the one person he will never discuss, Charlotte. So Anna chooses patience, which in her hands is not passivity but aim. Back in Port Charles, the word Faison begins to thread its way through conversations like a splinter under skin. People deny it, laugh it off, then glance over their shoulders anyway. Laboratories check their back doors twice. Hospitals audit freezer inventories with sudden zeal. A rumor about a donor program that never lists donors is dismissed as a clerical anomaly until it isn't. Dante receives a tip that feels staged, because it is clean in a way true tips never are. He files it and reroutes his attention to the messy edges, where genuine stories shed their first drops of blood. Meanwhile, someone purchases obsolete medical equipment that only looks obsolete to the untrained eye. Meanwhile, a shipment of inert gas canisters goes missing for 6 hours and then reappears with paperwork more perfect than life allows. Meanwhile, everyone asks if Faison might still be alive, and no one asks the more terrifying question: what if he doesn't have to be? Brennan returns to his hotel with the aftertaste of Cassadine mischief on his tongue and compiles the day's damage. Valentin gave him nothing and therefore far too much. The inference is a chorus: multiple actors, distributed control, Port Charles as petri dish, leverage everywhere. Brennan's instinct is to flood the zone, raid, subpoena, pressure, and yet he hears Anna's voice in his head, dry and unforgiving: blunt force creates martyrs, martyrs create movements. He drafts 2 plans, one official and loud for the files that must survive a Freedom of Information request, one elemental and quiet for the truth he intends to own. If he cannot control the program, he will at least dictate the terms of its exposure. The difference matters to men like Brennan the way oxygen matters to flame. Valentin sleeps that night as only men accustomed to danger sleep, with one ear open and one lie prepared. He reviews every syllable he gave Brennan, every abraded nerve, every calculated half-truth. He has told himself, more than once, that he exists outside the gravitational pull of his family's obsessions. But Charlotte anchors him to the world in ways ideology never could. If there is a machine humming in the dark that believes human minds are components, he will not let his daughter's name exist anywhere near its schematics. That simple, savage vow makes him unpredictable to men like Brennan and dangerous to men like whoever is truly in charge. And Anna walks her house long after midnight, the floorboards a metronome for memory. She catalogues Faison's motifs, the performative cruelty, the layered redundancies, the romance of control masquerading as love. She imagines an acolyte, or worse, a board of acolytes who have stripped the theatrics from his doctrine and kept only the utility. She drafts the questions that matter. Where would a mind be kept if its body had become optional? What kind of noise does a secret brain make inside a city already loud with grief? What kind of person believes salvation is a freezer's whisper? When morning comes she will ask these questions aloud, but for now she files them in the cabinet behind her eyes, next to the files the world thinks she burned. Power, in this triangle, is not a throne. It is a moving target. Brennan is free but watched. Valentin is confined but sovereign. Anna is unbound and, therefore, the most dangerous of all. The cryosynthesis rumor isn't an answer, it's a fuse, and Port Charles has never met a spark it didn't try to pocket. Perhaps Faison is ashes and glass and nothing more. Perhaps the brain was always a decoy, the kind of grotesque joke a man like Faison would leave behind to distract the righteous. Perhaps the truer legacy is a methodology: never die, not biologically but institutionally. Teach a system to reproduce itself and your biography becomes irrelevant. When Brennan and Valentin squared off in that Swiss room, the city was already moving. Tow trucks and ambulances and lab couriers, cops ordering coffee, parents promising their children that monsters aren't real because that is what good parents do. Somewhere inside that motion a machine inhaled. Somewhere, a chilly vault waited for a nameplate. Somewhere, a scientist told herself that compassion sometimes looks like blasphemy and pressed the green button anyway. The showdown at Steinmauer will be remembered for the insults that weren't quite insults and the threats that wore suits. But the true story will be written by what happens afterward, the files that go missing, the power outages that last exactly long enough, the way a certain wing at a certain hospital begins to record slightly different temperatures after midnight and then returns to normal by dawn. It would be comforting to declare a victor. Jack walked out, Valentin stayed seated, Anna declined to play by anyone's rules but her own. Yet victory here is not an exit stamp or a smirk. It is control of narrative, stewardship of fear, authorship of what the city believes when sirens wake it at 3 a.m. Brennan intends to author the official story, the one that reassures donors and terrifies enemies. Valentin intends to edit the underground version, the one criminals read to avoid dying stupid. Anna intends to end the story altogether, to find the core and pulverize it into something that cannot be reconstructed by clever men with funding. Between these intentions lies the narrow path Port Charles will have to walk. For now, the glacier keeps its secrets and the prison returns to its routines. But the temperature in Port Charles, measurable or not, has shifted. Nurses who have never met one another reach for the same cabinet keys at the same time. Detectives who pride themselves on instinct feel watched in rooms they once called safe. A father decides that the best way to protect his child is to become harder to predict than the people who threaten her. A woman who has loved and fought and buried too much chooses the most radical option left to her, patience sharpened into strategy. And an agency that has toppled regimes realizes, perhaps too late, that it is chasing something designed to outlast agencies and regimes alike. No one says Faison at breakfast because the city prefers its nightmares properly dressed. Yet the name reverberates anyway, coded into jokes, dissolved into gossip, tucked into the last lines of reports that will never be officially filed. If cryosynthesis exists here, it will try to make Port Charles a proof of concept. If it fails, it will pretend it never tried. If it succeeds, we may not know what to call the thing we have become. Until then, the standoff in Switzerland is not an ending, it is opening credits. The camera has panned from the mountain to the waterfront to the locked door down a hospital hall that no badge seems to open anymore. Someone holds the key. Whether that someone is a prisoner, a chief, a spy, or a ghost is the question. The answer is already in motion.